Uh, Everybody, welcome to today's webinar provided to you by Yorktown, Alabama. I'm Jason Fondren, filling in for Collier Neely today. I'd like to welcome Cheryl Morgan, our speaker. Cheryl is an architect and urban designer, one of the founding members of the Yorktown, Alabama program. She led the Small Town Design Initiative while director of the Urban Studio program of the Auburn University College of Design and Construction. And last but not least, one of my architecture professors while I was a student at Auburn University just a few years ago. Today, Cheryl will be talking about why design matters in our communities. During the presentation, feel free to send in any questions that you might have for Cheryl through the chat function. And once the presentation's over, we'll ask Cheryl to field a few of those as we have time. And with that, Cheryl, if you're ready, I'll mute myself and let you go.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thanks, Cheryl.
I remember those days in Urban Studio when Jason was a star. It is such a pleasure to be part of a Yorktown event. As Jason said, I was there when Yorktown came to Alabama and became what I truly believe is a force that's helped to change the landscape of small town Alabama. I want to focus today on some characteristics of making good places, places for people to live, work, and play, because we know that the quality of place is a leading component in quality of life. Every day, American people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, and where to retire. In fact, a Strong Town study from 5 years ago confirmed that 56% of millennials and 46% of boomers prefer to live in walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. And we've learned certainly over the last 2 years that the indicators of how people make choices of where they live and work are even more important. Joe Courtwright, a leading economic development consultant, says, the unique characteristics of place may be the only truly defensible source of competitive advantage for communities. Those things that make you different, distinct, and special are what you have to attract people when they're making those choices about where to live, where to work, and where to play. So place does matter. Saving places, creating good distinctive places is good for community, good for the economy, and good for the environment. I love the National Historic Preservation Campaign from a few years ago, This Place Matters. It's catchy and fun and to the point in the way a good campaign should be. But I must tell you, I captured this photo from their website. I must be missing something because with this site, at least now, and in this slide, I'm not sure I can say that I see what matters, particularly compared to this place. Now, this place matters. This is Huntsville, and it's clear that the legacy left by their forefathers makes it easy to see this place matters. We have those legacies all across our state and in our small town, Alabama. Most of you are familiar with Fairhope and their campaign of beautification. But I'd like you to look closely in this slide, and you can see why they needed to create that foreground beauty, because the background buildings are frankly not particularly beautiful, certainly not as beautiful as these modest but dignified streetscape buildings in Abbeville, or this beautiful ensemble of buildings in downtown Demopolis. Sometimes a single building can anchor a place, like this Unitarian Universalist Church in Camp Hill, Alabama, or the courthouse in Marion. And of course, here in Birmingham, there's no more important place, perhaps, and no more important building than the 16th Street Baptist Church. Place matters. Sometimes we've done well at retaining our distinctive and special places, but that's not always the case. And I'm sure you can all remember stories where you've lost places or cases where you've saved a building but lost the place. I'd like to talk to you about two examples that illustrate why we need to focus not just on buildings, but also on the places that give them context. This is not to say that saving buildings, particularly those related to our shared sense of history and identity, is not important. But let me give you two examples to illustrate my point. I know many of you have heard Alabama native Ed McMahon speak, and Salem Church here in this slide is an example that he often uses. The reason I include it are his reasons, but for me, it's important not only because it is or was a significant Virginia field hospital during the Chancellorsville campaign of the Civil War, but is also where Auburn's War Eagle was rescued and adopted. So here we have this beautifully restored Salem Church, but when we back out, they've saved the building, but lost the place. And of course, it's not like there weren't other places nearby where this strip center and this strip retail could have been built. This is Lost Mountain, Georgia, where I grew up. Not really a town, but rather a crossroads marked by a general store and a church. That store, although it's probably not much to look at here, represented our sense of community. You'd run into your neighbors as you stopped for a loaf of bread or to buy Mr. Newt's sweet potatoes. You'd literally find folks sitting on the porch, chewing a plug of tobacco and chewing the fat, or eating a moon pie and drinking an RC cola. Well, you probably know where this is going. This building has been retrofitted as a community bank, which is a great use, and lovingly restored right down to the gas pumps. But as you can see, they saved the building and lost the place. Of course, my mother loves that there's a supermarket close by, but it could have gone into the abandoned strip center less than a mile away. And several of these businesses have not succeeded because it's a hard place at a very busy intersection to get in and out. They've saved the building, but they lost the place. It makes me want to cry because, of course, we'll never get it back. The place is gone. Place matters. Sometimes, though, saving one building can make a huge difference in placemaking. This Taco Bell, for instance, had proposed building a standard strip model, you can visualize it, on the site of this historic Spanish-style home. The Planning Commission, the Design Review Committee said no. After threats and fights, they, Taco Bell, capitulated and restored the historic home as their Taco Bell, and it became their highest grossing site in the country and is touted in their annual reports. People are looking for authentic experiences. So while the food may not be authentic, the atmosphere can be. And here in Birmingham, Chick-fil-A wanted to build this standard highway model in our most walkable historic mixed-use district, 5 Points, backing up to the Highlands Bar and Grill, the top restaurant in the country, according to James Beard in 2018. Birmingham's Design Review Committee said no. Threats and appeals ensued, and ultimately Design Review won. We won and got multiple benefits. They preserved a building. Now, this building is not much to look at, but it had embedded energy. They didn't tear it down and start over. They brought the building to the sidewalk, and that's the way it should be in an urban, walkable, pedestrian neighborhood. And they also hired a local architect, one that knew the importance of placemaking and who cared about this place. And incidentally, that local firm, Cohen, Carnaggio, and Reynolds, got 12 more commissions for Chick-fil-A's in sensitive contexts. The language that turned the tide in the appeal was from a planning commission member who wrote that buildings in historic neighborhood commercial environments should be able to have multiple lives without the branding, the shape of the initial occupant. That is, they should be available for adaptive reuse. This is a placemaking concept, and it's a concept that acknowledges one of the great attributes of many buildings worth preserving. They were built well, with quality materials, built to last, and with straightforward footprints that are easily adapted for new uses that can continue to be contributing in every sense for generations. Place matters. Another example of saving a building that is about place retaining and also community building is in Valley, Alabama. Valley is a historic textile mill company town on the Chattahoochee River. They had always been a rich place-based community. They had a strong sense of place. The families of the mill town worked together, worshiped together, studied together, and played together. And when the mills closed, the sense of community stayed and was tied tightly to the institutions like the schools that still brought community together. The County Board of Education, this is the Lafayette Lanier School that's in the heart of the community. The Board of Education was going to replace the windows of this building because they needed to lower operating cost, particularly their utility bills. But these windows were special. They were austral windows, and the citizens were concerned, of course, about the cost of running the school, but also concerned about the loss of character of their beloved school. They investigated with an energy audit and found that one of the reasons the utility bills were so high is that the windows didn't close properly after year upon year of built-up paint. When the windows were properly restored, at a savings, by the way, over the cost of new windows, they functioned as designed and the utility bills came down. The added benefit, the town found a power in working together to save the things they loved. And that gave them a sense of identity and the things that were special and precious to them. And that was the beginning of their historic commission. And that then resulted in placing all 4 of their mill villages on the National Register. Place matters. So what are the attributes of place? And by the way, if any of you have your control bar at the bottom, you might want to nudge it so that you can really see the attributes on this slide. There are many attributes, of course, that are about placemaking, and you would probably have your own list. But the bottom line is we recognize place when we see it, when we experience it. We also know anywhere USA, we know where there is placelessness. We recognize authentic. And of course, that's where we spend time when particularly convenience is not the only point. And that's where we see our neighbors and walk our dog. That's where we meet our friends. It's where millennials and boomers spend their time and their money. And by the way, a mobile retired couple has the spending power of 3 factory workers in your local economy. Place matters. So I want to challenge you to not only consider how we preserve places, but also about our responsibility to create the places that will be worth preserving 50 years from now. I want to start with Double Springs. This is Winston County, the Free State of Winston during the Civil War. Their courthouse is actually humble by Alabama standards, but it sits on the highest point of the highest ridge in this part of Appalachia. And with its native limestone and dignified design, makes it clear that this building is representing the values of its builders, who thought it was important to invest in a place where the community came together to create and engage in the rules of living together as community. The clock on the top of the cupola here is signaling a respect for the value of their citizens' time and a commitment to each other and to community. But let's look across the street. Here's Town Hall. Now, my grandfather's generation built this courthouse. My generation built this town hall. Which generation do you think had more collective disposable resources? Actually, is about the same generation to generation. But they invested in a legacy, and we invested our disposable collective resources in infrastructure and in sprawl. What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value. Do you think anyone will want to preserve this town hall or this senior center in a town that will be unnamed? Particularly since this metal building is out on the edge of town, backing up to the ball fields and signals loud and clear, we've put you out to pasture. What were they thinking? Economy, probably. The least we can do, not the most we can do, and certainly not legacy. At least they didn't, like one town, put their senior center in the old funeral home. What were they thinking? And what better choice would have been to renovate a building in town like Mapleville did with their old train depot, bringing their seniors into the heart of the community where they can add vitality and have the potential to shop and support the local Main Street businesses. What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value and how we regard those elders in our community. What do these garden homes say about what's important? Certainly not finding the front door. And they're almost exactly the same size as these homes, which, by the way, have garages too, but they're on the alley, not blocking the residents from the sense of community around this shared common green. Which street says people and community is important? This one or this one? And again, they have garages, but they're off the alley in the back. The front porches where people gather, sidewalks, they're facing the street, facing the community. What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value. And to drive home the notion of building to our values, these two historic churches come to the street, to the sidewalk, welcoming and serving the community, anchoring the corner where this one sits in a sea of parking. What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value. I want to share some Birmingham examples that illustrate, I hope, not just the value of creating place, but that it's an attitude we, both public and private, need to realize is about good economic development. The first is in our Avondale community in Birmingham. It is a community which is on fire. Even the abandoned service stations have been adaptively reused for eateries or bars. It started with public investment and grassroots community efforts to restore this CCC era amphitheater and other CCC era structures, all stone, that are in Avondale Park. CCC structures, by the way, that were built to last. A friends group, Friends of the Park, raised awareness and funds to work with the city to totally renovate the park. This highly visible evidence of public investment gave confidence to the investors who saw opportunities in the main street of the adjacent neighborhood center, which you can see there longitudinally, it's perpendicular to the park in the slide. They saw opportunities there because it was historic, there was good building stock, and there was a real sense of authenticity and potential for place. At the time, it was blighted, but the first investors were the bars and then the brewers. The brewery needed a historic building because that's the way the original law was written for opening a brewery. Thank you, legislators. It was a huge success, built confidence with that huge win, and then began to attract other restaurants, cafes, and more bars. It's now a destination in Birmingham, prize winning, written about in magazines, and a true place. The keys to this success are several: an active and engaged community, public-private partnership between the city and private investors, and the investment in a community space, a green space outdoors, a place where community comes together. And I should note here that an investment in green, parks and trails is one of the most important ones any community can make. There was also a concentration of historic building stock, and importantly, that concentration gave the possibility of visible evidence of change and transformation. That is, where you can see not just one thing happening, but several things happening together. And this is an important principle. It's the cupcake principle. Yes, you heard right, the cupcake principle. Every town, every community, every neighborhood has limited capacity, whether that's resources, dollars and cents, people, volunteer time. If you spread those resources evenly over every part of your community, everyone gets a cupcake, but that's about all. And there's probably not going to be an impact or momentum built with that pretty pitiful cupcake, particularly the kind of momentum and impact that can attract attention of investors, partners, new businesses, new families. If, on the other hand, you prioritize in your most visible areas, probably your main street, you'll get a cupcake with a cherry on top and sprinkles. So I also want to talk about our railroad park. Many of you have probably visited it or you know about it. It is a real place, not just a lawn with trees, but our city, again, with lots of grassroots and citizen support and fundraising, created a legacy park. And its success, and I want to show you, this is, for those of you who don't know, it's what it looked like before. And this is almost exactly the same spot in the city now. It is actively used by all sorts of people in our community. Everyone believes this park is their front yard. And its success attracted the Barons back downtown and a brewery, and that win and the state historic tax credits built confidence in a wave of restorations and adaptive reuses led by the Pizitz, the Lyric, the Florentine, and many others, as well as new construction. Here's a new apartment building on the edge of the park. And altogether, over the last 10 years, there have been well over $1 billion in construction in and around our downtown, and particularly around the area where Railroad Park exists. Spurred by investment in placemaking and underpinned in so many ways by the amazing building stock left by our forefathers. I watched this new building go up. It's not bad, but it's not built with enduring materials, so it probably won't last 50 years. And sadly, I must say, with this design, it may not be one that I would fight to preserve. What will be our legacy? It's important. What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value. Place matters. This place matters. So I don't want to leave you with an example, the one in Birmingham that probably seems out of reach to most of you. I want to spend a few minutes on some of the keys to planning for success. I trust that most of you in the audience today know what I mean when I say fixing to get ready to. Well, for me, that's 3 layers of procrastination: fixing to get ready to. And many communities feel like they're always fixing to get ready to, or just fixing things. And for me, there are ways to get past that towards action, towards making the places we deserve. And I want to emphasize that: places we deserve. We deserve beautiful, lasting, enduring place here in Alabama. So my first key to success: get a plan. After all, without a plan, how do you know where your best chance of a cupcake is? The cupcake with the cherry and the sprinkles. A good plan lets you prioritize and explain those priorities, particularly to the areas of the communities that are 2nd, 3rd, and 4th on the priority list, so that citizens can get behind the top priority and then move up in the priority list as successes occur. Inventory your assets. What makes your small town great? What will be those things that can build and help potential to keep your best and brightest or to bring them back to raise their kids? What will attract the entrepreneurs? What will attract the boomers? Your Town program is all about asset-based planning. And over the years, we have, I don't think ever, all the towns that have come through Your Town, seen a town that somehow was not brilliant in its own way. Third piece of advice, get fresh eyes. Valley, the town I was mentioning earlier in the presentation, didn't know they had the Chattahoochee River. This is an asset Birmingham would kill for. There's a long story about why they didn't know they had the Chattahoochee River, and they didn't value it as an asset. Actually, of course, they did know they had it, but they didn't think of it as an asset. And if someone wants to ask in the Q&A, I'll fill you in on that long story. Also, really think hard about how you make a good first impression. Do you want to move here or here? What we build, where we build, and how we build shows what we value. And finally, believe you can do it. The two most significant indicators of a town's potential for success are, one, strong evidence of pride. Think through all the things we've seen today. You can see pride in those places that are Alabama. Strong first impressions, evidence of pride that is visible in building as if you deserve a beautiful place. And second, believe you can do it. I know you can do it. You have to believe you can do it. I want to end here for Q&A, but before we finish, I'm going to ask Jason to let us pull back in, because I have a couple of things that I'd like to leave you with, homework, as it were, because I think these are a couple of things that will get you thinking, perhaps thinking differently about the kinds of ways you perceive your community, as well as ways you can start to make things happen. So at this point, Jason, if there are questions, I'm happy to try to field those.
Let's see. Rob says, discuss the value of having a river near one's downtown area.
Well, I think that having a river is certainly a tried and true, this case study after case study that shows how that can create the potential for attracting people to the downtown and for engaging both locals and tourists. Our southern example that is so often cited is, of course, Chattanooga, where they have really embraced their adjacency to the river. Even smaller communities, many of our Alabama small towns have communities, but often historically they've turned their back to that river because it was the industrial front door of the community, not the living front door of the community. By and large, that use has shifted in most cities, and now the waterfront is available for a different sort of engagement. I was talking about Valley earlier. One of the reasons they didn't value the river is that it had been a dangerous place to go, and kids were told not to go there. So between the flooding, flash flooding, and the fact that it was the place people went for beyond fishing for naughty things, finding a bottle of hooch. So it had a history in the community of not being a place that you engaged with any thought of recreation or community activities. Beginning to see how other cities had embraced their waterfront gave them some strong examples of alternative ways to use the waterfront. I think to that point, it needs to be safe, it needs to be visible, and it needs to have a direct and strong connection to your retail, commercial, historic core, so that the visit to the river becomes a multiplier, that people don't just go to the river and leave, or the waterfront, that they go and engage with activities that are purposeful. I think the other thing is, one of the things we learned at Railroad Park is that you need to program public spaces. You need to change people's habits and help them have reasons to engage with the place the first time. So that programming helps people understand that it's a good place to be, that it's a safe place to be, and that it's a place that they will encounter their neighbors and visitors to the community. So if you have a waterfront and have done work on it, and maybe it's not having the results that you thought, it's probably because you need to have some very aggressive programming to help people understand how to use the waterfront and help support the vendors and the businesses that are directly available to that waterfront.
Thanks, Cheryl. Quickly, just kind of piggyback on that. You had mentioned earlier that Birmingham wished that we'd had a river adjacent to downtown. We don't have a river, but from the first time I came to Birmingham, I think this was Frank Setzer who referred to it as, we don't have a river, we have a river of steel, which is the railroad. And as you can see, what happened in Birmingham was that we didn't have water to show off and connect people with, but we had something that people were able to envision as an asset that could function in the same way that a river or some other type of more obvious feature can provide to a community. So Railroad Park, obviously right at the railroad, became sort of what a river is in some other communities as an asset. So you may not have a river, but you may have something else. It may not be obvious, but keep looking. It's going to be something unique to your community, just like Cheryl had mentioned at the beginning. We've got another question from Larry. Is it important when creating parks and trails to think of them as part of mobility networks?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the more ways you can encourage your people, the citizens of your community, to move outside of a car, the more chance you have to build community and to support businesses and commerce in and around those trails and open spaces. I think the other thing that we know is when trails and open spaces and the streets and sidewalks of our commercial districts are well planned for accessibility, that it's good for everyone. If someone with a stroller or a wheelchair can get around easily and feel comfortable and safe, that's always a good environment for everyone. I think having alternative with bicycles, scooters, other kinds of things, it increases that ability to be out and about, and again, outside that capsule of the automobile. So yes, I think always you want to be looking at the most ways to get people moving around in your community and to reinforce those. The other thing you may need to do, though, I was talking about priorities before, and many of you may be familiar with Jeff Speck. He's written a lot of books and does a lot of talks and workshops on walkability. And one of his strategies is prioritization. I mean, he talks about triaging in your downtowns or in your communities and looking for the streets that have the most potential to create connectivity between assets in your community, the most potential to support business and commercial eateries and day-to-day activities, banks, drugstores, barbershops, and that you can't, like I was talking about in the cupcake theory principle, you can't equally spread your resources across every street, or you won't be able to do enough to have a real impact on walkability. So prioritizing, assessing the streets and places where you can identify trails, sidewalk improvements, mobility improvements, multimodal improvements that are concentrated in the areas that have the most potential to leverage that investment. The other thing I was going to say, Jason, based on your comment about about Railroad Park, is, Manhattan had two rivers, and they ended up, what they built was Central Park. And Central Park, of course, is the heart of that island and the most expensive real estate. And so I don't think a river is the magic key. I think a place where community comes together, where there's evidence of public investment in the notion of people and community and high quality of life. So a good public open space, a central park, wherever that's appropriate in your city. And that's very different than a ballpark or a track or other kinds of recreational activities. Those are important too. But a place that is available for the entire community without the need of a small child and a baseball bat is a really important key to community building.
Well, thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, like I always think of when in certain conversations, there isn't a single magic bullet or silver bullet that's just going to fix things. It takes work. And the Main Street program has their 4-point approach, which I think is relevant to that concept of, you can have a nice place, but if you don't have sort of the economic component of it that supports that place is not going to thrive. So you have to have all the gears kind of working together, and that takes people who are committed and understand that you have to approach it from multiple angles. You can't just rely on one thing to just fix it and keep it sustainable. Any other questions? If not, Cheryl, did you have a little bit more for us, or?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I want to share. And the first is this is, and I want to be sure everybody can see this. In fact, I may. Oops. So this is a company in Asheville, North Carolina, Urban 3, run by a guy named Joe Minicozy. And you may or may not be able to see the upper right-hand image. It's a little downtown building, about a 5-story building. One of the things they do is help municipalities understand how and where their resources are coming from. And they make a case for the fact that by and large, we look at our municipal resources from the wrong end of the telescope. We're used to, as they say, thinking about miles per gallon versus miles per tank full. They have a very interesting example where they show a big pickup truck, which of course gets more miles to the tank versus a little Fiat car. But if you think about miles per gallon, the Fiat wins every time. So it's the example that they often give is, this is their Walmart. It consumes 34 acres of land. Their tax per acre is $6,500. Their retail taxes, their sales taxes, is $47,000 an acre. There's nobody living there. And their jobs per acre is 5.9. The 5-story historic building on the corner, which is in the upper right, only consumes 0.2 acres. So when you look at their property taxes, it's $634,000 per acre. Their retail taxes are $83,600 per acre. There are 90 residents per acre and 73.7 jobs per acre. So having a lens that shows that density, concentration of mixed use areas is much more efficient and productive and less resource hungry than that big Walmart that was built to last 7 years, cheapest possible building they could build, and then has low chances of adaptive reuse. So look up Urban 3, Joe Minicozy, and you will find some really excellent YouTube videos that they've done that elaborates on the way they do arithmetic and helping communities understand where they should be investing to have the most return on those municipal dollars. Then finally, I want to leave you with, and again, you may not be able to see this, but in the upper left-hand corner, it says incredible edible mortem. This is a TED Talk by Pam Warhurst, and they have created what they call vegetable tourism. They have taken every available place in this little town in England and planted vegetables, which they then make available to anyone who wants to pick them. They have to have signs to help people understand when it's ripe and when it's pickable. They have it at the police department and along the towpath and in front of City Hall. And the reason to go look at this TED Talk, besides the fact that Pam is an incredible speaker and has energy out the wazoo, what they talk about is, one, they believed they could do something, and the power of small actions. It is incredible what they've been able to accomplish. And their motto is, if you eat, you're in. Everyone in the community is part of this propaganda gardening, which they have created. So I hope you'll Google Pam Warhurst TED Talk, and it's a really incredibly inspirational take on what one small community has done and how it has been contagious across the world. So with that, that's all I have today. Again, it's been a pleasure to share with you. And I saw recently that your town registration is open and that everyone will take advantage of this incredible Alabama asset.
Thanks, Cheryl. I had one more quick question for you.
Okay.
In what we see this a lot with folks who come to the Your Town workshop. They get excited and passionate about their communities and hopeful. What, if for those in the audience who want to go back to their communities and start a conversation about design and place matters, what's something that you can arm them with to convince those who they need to get on board to make a difference in their community?
Well, I think one of the things to do when you get home is to find out what tools you already have in your toolbox. Do you have a comprehensive plan? Do you have a strategic plan as a town? And if so, what are the things on that list? How old is that plan? Is it due a revisit? Are there things that have changed in your community since that plan was developed that means that there could be a re-examination of that plan? Find out if that plan had strong community engagement. If it didn't, then it may need revisiting for that very reason. I think too that there'll be ideas that came from the Your Town and Your Town speakers that you may be able to immediately apply. Sometimes it's a cleanup in the community, that strong evidence of pride. getting people to take responsibility for the community. It may be looking at the storefronts in your historic downtown and seeing if they need some TLC. And there's one community that we worked in is they decided to actually just wash everything on the main street, and it made a huge difference and got people really excited. And I mean, there was roll up your sleeves elbow grease, as we used to call it. It took effort, but it was amazing what happened just by taking down things that were broken, freshening up the downtown. I think the other thing to look at is the habits of the community. Are all the businesses in downtown consistently open at the same time? What's going on in the downtown that could help leverage more opportunity? I can't tell you the number of towns I've been in that there was a dance studio or a taekwondo or something in a storefront in the downtown, and you'd be there at 6 o'clock at night, and there's cars parked all up and down the street with parents waiting for the kids in their lessons, and not a single coffee shop open, or not a single bookstore open, or not anything where you could have gone and spent that hour while the kids were doing their things. So we form habits of particularly our merchants and our business people about how we operate. So is that a collective endeavor that just sort of scratching your head and thinking about it? I hear from a lot of communities that we don't have enough parking, but then you find out that the merchant and their employees have parked at the front door instead of in the back on the alley. So look at how you have fallen into habits that are not good for either business or those impressions you can make in the community. There's a community in Northwest Oregon that I often refer to as an example. They did not have a Yourtown experience, but they had a technical assistance team come and work with them. And afterwards, they literally had bake sales to raise the money and work with the local hardware stores to get paint donated. And they got a fresh coat of paint on most of their downtown buildings. And people could see that something was changing and began to want to know, how do I get involved and what can I do? And what are the things that we can do next? So I think that visible evidence of something changing, whether it's washing buildings, taking down things that are broken, repairing signs, getting the sidewalk swept every morning, things that make it evident that you give a hoot about the place you live.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Cheryl. Anybody else have anything else? If not, let me share that this webinar has been recorded, and materials will be available through the Yourtown Facebook page. If anybody wants to revisit or share, and please do, if you have not been to the Yourtown workshop before, like Cheryl said, registration is open. And thanks everyone, Cheryl, for all of the advice and information, and thanks everyone for participating today.
Thank you.